Life that seems perfect on the outside, a beautiful home, a loving family, and a seemingly happy marriage. But beneath this polished surface lies a world of secrets and desires that could shatter everything. A mother caught between a marriage that has long since lost its spark and a son's best friend who's always been more like family. The bonds that connect them seem so innocent at first, until one night, everything changes. What starts as a simple, secret connection between two people ends up unraveling a family, a friendship, and a life that will never be the same. But the real twist, no one saw it coming. Not the husband, not the son, and certainly not the best friend. Betrayal, manipulation, and lies build up like a storm waiting to break. And when it does, it's more devastating than anyone could have imagined. But what exactly happened? How did a love triangle turn into a deadly tragedy? Stay with me as I reveal the chilling details of a case that tore apart not just a family, but a whole community's sense of trust. But before we continue, think about this for a moment. Could you ever suspect something like this happening in your own life? A best friend crossing that line with your mother or your own parent, hiding something so dark behind closed doors? What would you do if you found out? I want to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let me know how you'd react. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Let me paint the picture for you. On the surface, this family seems like any other suburban household. Nothing out of the ordinary. A quiet home, tucked away in a peaceful neighborhood, surrounded by other families with their own routines. In this home lives Janet, a stay-at-home mother. She spends her days caring for the house, running errands, and trying to make the best of her life. Then there's her husband, Dave, a man who works long hours, often away from home, absorbed in his career. Dave is a good man, but the years of routine have taken their toll. They've become more like roommates than husband and wife, and Janet has started to feel it. The affection that once tied them together is fading, slipping away with every passing day, and in the silence of their home, something else begins to grow, something she isn't ready to face yet. And then there's Alex, their teenage son. He's the apple of his mother's eye, a good kid with a promising future. He's smart, athletic, and always surrounded by friends. One of those friends, Michael, had been part of the family since he was just a kid. He and Alex grew up together, practically brothers. Michael was everything that Alex's parents hoped their son would be, charming, outgoing, and the type of kid everyone loves to have around. He spent so much time at their house, you'd think he was a permanent fixture. His friendship with Alex seemed rock solid, built on years of shared experiences, inside jokes, and a bond that was unbreakable. Or so it seemed. But, as close as Michael was with the family, something strange started to happen. A shift. It started with small moments, a lingering glance, a touch that lasted a second too long. At first, Janet brushed it off, and it suddenly became such unnecessary. With the family. They had their own secret moments, away from prying eyes, where something deeper, darker, began to form. What was once innocent, Michael's presence in their home, was now charged with a tension that neither of them could ignore. As for Dave, he was oblivious. To him, Michael was just another one of Alex's friends, someone he trusted, someone who had been around for years. He had no idea that his wife, the woman he'd built a life with, was drifting away from him, and that the man who was always there, under his very roof, was slowly becoming something much more to Janet. There were days when Janet would catch herself staring out the window, lost in thought. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, maybe an escape from the quiet desperation that had taken hold of her marriage, maybe a way out without knowing exactly where she was going. The loneliness had begun to eat away at her, and Michael, his presence, his attention, was beginning to fill the emptiness she'd been ignoring for far too long. The house felt colder than ever despite the warmth of the summer sun outside. Do you see it now? The tension building, the cracks forming where no one thought they'd appear. It's easy to look at a family like this and think everything is fine. But behind those closed doors, secrets were already starting to slip through the cracks. Secrets that would soon lead to something no one could have expected. But before we go any further, think about it. How well do you really know your friend's parents? Could someone close to your family ever cross that line? Could something like this happen to you? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'm curious to hear your perspective. And don't forget to like this video if you're ready to learn more about how this all unfolded. It all began so innocently, or at least it seemed that way. Michael was a regular presence in their home, always popping in to hang out with Alex or to grab a meal after school. Janet, ever the welcoming mother, enjoyed having him around. She would cook for the boys, laugh at their jokes, and offer advice when they shared their teenage dilemmas. To anyone watching, it looked perfectly normal, a kind-hearted mother treating her son's best friend like one of her own. But somewhere along the way, the boundaries blurred. At first it was nothing more than casual conversations. While Alex and Dave were out, Janet would chat with Michael in the kitchen. They'd talk about his plans for the future, his dreams, his struggles. Michael had a charm about him, an energy that filled the silence in Janet's life. He made her laugh in a way she hadn't in years, reminded her of a version of herself she thought she'd lost. Slowly, those conversations grew longer, more personal. What started as light-hearted banter turned into deeper, more intimate discussions about her marriage, her loneliness, and the ache of feeling invisible in her own home. Late-night chats followed. Janet would find herself lingering downstairs after everyone had gone to bed, waiting for Michael to stop by after a late practice or a night out with Alex. They'd sit on the couch, their voices hushed, their laughter softer, careful not to wake anyone. It was during those quiet moments that something unspoken began to take shape between them, a connection that neither of them would acknowledge at first, but one that grew stronger with each passing day. It wasn't long before innocent touches became lingering gestures, a hand brushing against hers as they passed each other in the hallway, a hug that lingered just a second too long. And then, one evening, when the house was silent and the world outside felt miles away, the line was crossed. A kiss. Tentative at first, but electric, full of the tension that had been building for weeks. From that moment on, there was no turning back. Janet tried to justify it to herself. She told herself it wasn't her fault. Her marriage had been over for years, hadn't it? Dave barely noticed her anymore, barely spoke to her unless it was about bills or groceries. She was lonely, desperate for connection, and Michael was there. He saw her in a way no one else did. That's what she told herself as the affair deepened, as she fell further into a web she couldn't untangle herself from. But deep down she knew. She knew this was wrong, that she was betraying her son, her family, and yet she couldn't stop. Michael, on the other hand, seemed to revel in it. He wasn't just the charming boy who laughed at her jokes anymore. He had a confidence about him, an intensity that kept Janet under his spell. He would remind her to be careful, to make sure no one found out. "It's our secret," he would say with a grin. And Janet, desperate to hold on to whatever fleeting happiness she'd found, went along with it. She became an expert at hiding the truth, sneaking glances when no one was looking, finding excuses to spend time alone with Michael, and lying to herself that it wasn't as bad as it seemed. But secrets have a way of unraveling, don't they? The more Janet tried to keep the affair hidden, the more the cracks in her life began to show. She became distracted, nervous, jumping at every sound, every unexpected knock at the door. Alex started to notice. He'd walk into a room, and his mom and his best friend would suddenly stop talking, their laughter cutting off too quickly. Michael seemed to spend more time at their house than with him lately, and when Alex asked why, the answers felt hollow, rehearsed. Janet felt the walls closing in. She was caught in a trap of her own making, trying to balance her family life with a secret that was becoming harder to hide by the day. And then there was Michael, whose charm had begun to take on a darker edge. He had a way of looking at her now, a way of speaking that made her feel both exhilarated and terrified. She wondered if she'd made a mistake, if she'd opened a door that should have stayed shut. But it was too late. The affair was no longer something she could control. It had a life of its own now. And then came the first real sign of danger. One night, as Janet and Michael sat together in the living room, whispering in the dark, they didn't notice Alex standing in the hallway, watching them. He didn't say anything, not then, but the look in his eyes was enough to make Janet's heart stop. He knew something wasn't right, and as the days went on, his suspicions grew. He started asking questions, watching their every move. Janet could feel the tension rising, the fragile balance she'd created starting to crumble. Because no secret stays buried forever. And when Alex finally pieced it all together, the fallout would be more devastating than anyone could have imagined. But what do you think? Could something like this stay hidden for long? And how would you react if you found out your own parent was hiding a secret like this? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I can't wait to hear what you think as we dive even deeper into this tangled web of lies and betrayal. The moment that would forever change the lives of everyone involved came one evening, when Alex walked into the living room to find something he could never unsee. It wasn't a scene he was prepared for. He had spent years looking up to Michael, his best friend, the one person he thought he could always trust, the one who was supposed to have his back. But that day, in that one heart-stopping moment, everything shattered. There they were, his mother Janet and Michael, locked in an embrace, their lips tangled in a kiss, their bodies pressed close together. It wasn't a simple mistake, a slip of the hand. No, this was something far more intimate, far more real. Alex froze, his eyes wide with disbelief. For a second, he thought he might be dreaming. Maybe this was some twisted nightmare he hadn't woken up from. But no, it was real. The world around him felt like it had just cracked open, revealing the ugly truth he'd never imagined possible. His mother, the woman he'd trusted, the one who had raised him, had betrayed him in the worst possible way. And his best friend, was the one who had broken that trust. It was too much to process in that moment. His heart pounded in his chest as he stumbled back, desperate to escape the suffocating weight of what he had just witnessed. In a daze, Alex turned and ran out of the room, his mind swirling with 1,000 thoughts. The pain, the anger, it was all too much to handle. He went straight to his room and slammed the door shut, curling into a ball on his bed, trying to make sense of what he had just seen. But the more he tried to push it out of his mind, the clearer it became. His mother had lied to him. She had been hiding this affair, this betrayal, from him for God knows how long. So many times to happen. Croaking for her, and washed into his father. And Michael, how could he? How could someone he had known all his life do this to him? He couldn't wrap his head around it. The rage inside him was building, a fire that refused to be put out. He thought about everything he had shared with Michael, the way they had been like brothers, the trust that had been built over the years, and now that trust was gone. It felt like a piece of his soul had been ripped out, and he didn't know how to heal from it. All he felt was anger, anger at his mother for her betrayal, anger at himself, anger at the society had set towards him, and now that trust was gone. He couldn't rip his head off the blocks for no word that encompassed any promise for other people to hate. To them, anger at Michael for making a fool of him, and anger at himself for not seeing it sooner. Alex didn't know what to do with all this emotion. He couldn't go to his father. How could he explain something like this to Dave? He couldn't even talk to his friends. No one would understand the depth of the hurt he was feeling. And so he sat there, alone in his room, consumed by the storm inside him. The rage began to fester, twisting his thoughts. No, this wasn't something that could be swept under the rug. His mother and his best friend had betrayed him in the most unforgivable way, and Alex was about to make a decision that would change everything. He knew the house well. He knew where his mother kept her things, where Michael would be, and how to get to him. His thoughts began to race, becoming more and more erratic. The anger was blinding now, a red haze that clouded his judgment. All he could think about was getting even, making them feel the way he felt. Broken, betrayed, abandoned. There was a dark, twisted satisfaction that began to take root inside him. Revenge felt like the only way to make this right, to make them feel the way he did. In a fit of rage, Alex grabbed a kitchen knife. His hands were shaking, his heart pounding so loudly he could hardly hear his own thoughts. He moved quickly, quietly, like a shadow in the night. The house was eerily quiet, the tension hanging thick in the air. He wasn't sure what he was going to do, but all he knew was that he couldn't let them get away with this. He couldn't let them continue with their lives as if nothing had changed, as if he hadn't just been torn apart by the people he loved most. When Alex reached the living room, his mother and Michael were still there, unaware of the storm that was coming for them. He stood in the doorway for a moment, his breath coming in short gasps. The world around him seemed to slow down, as if time had stopped. He raised the knife, the cold steel gleaming in the dim light, his mind clouded with rage. But then, something inside him shifted. A moment of clarity, a fleeting thought that broke through the chaos. What was he doing? What would this solve? Would it really make him feel better? Would it erase the pain? But it was too late. Alex had already crossed the line. The decision he made in that moment would haunt him for the rest of his life. And when the dust settled, when the consequences of his actions began to sink in, he would realize just how irreversible this tragedy had become. But nothing could have prepared them for what Alex would do next. A decision made in the heat of anger, driven by betrayal, that would forever alter the course of their lives. And it wasn't just Michael and Janet who would be affected. Alex's entire world was about to collapse in on itself. The family, once so tight-knit, would never be the same again. What would you do if you found out your best friend was involved with your mother? Would you confront them, or would you seek revenge? Would you be able to forgive, or would the pain of betrayal be too much to bear? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. This story is far from over, and the next part will reveal just how far the consequences of this tragic choice will reach. What happened next, no one could have predicted. In that fleeting moment of anger, Alex's life, along with his family's, was changed forever. The knife, once just an object in his hand, became a symbol of the raw, uncontrollable pain he felt. The sound of the blade cutting through the air, the thud as it met its mark, and the silence that followed. Everything happened so quickly, yet time seemed to stretch endlessly in the aftermath. The room, once filled with whispers and secrets, was now filled with the unbearable weight of violence. Alex stood there, his breath coming in ragged gasps, as he watched Michael, his best friend, his confidant, fall to the floor. Blood began to pool around him, spreading in a grotesque, slow-moving circle. In that moment, Alex's rage seemed to dissipate, replaced by a sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach. It was too late to take it back now, too late to undo the damage. His hands, trembling from the adrenaline and shock, dropped the knife to the floor with a clatter that echoed through the silent house. Janet, who had been caught in the madness, screamed. The sound cut through the air like a knife itself, filled with horror and disbelief. Her son, her own flesh and blood, had just hurt the one person she had betrayed her family for. The betrayal that had begun as a forbidden secret, something hidden and whispered in the dark, had now exploded into a catastrophic, irreversible act. The room was chaos, shouting, pleading, and the desperate sound of a life slipping away. Within moments, the house was no longer a home. The calm suburban neighborhood, once a safe haven for the family, became the scene of a crime. Emergency responders rushed in, their boots heavy against the floor, their voices steady as they tried to stabilize Michael. But it was too late. Despite their best efforts, despite the frantic attempts to save him, Michael didn't make it. The life Alex had taken in a fit of rage was now gone, and all that remained was the stark reality of the choices he had made. The police arrived soon after. They cordoned off the house, turning the once comfortable living room into a crime scene. The flashing lights from the squad cars lit up the night, casting an eerie glow on the neighborhood. Officers questioned Janet, her face pale, eyes wide with disbelief. She was in shock, unable to comprehend the weight of what had just happened. And then there was Alex, standing in the corner of the room, his eyes hollow, his face drained of color. He didn't say a word. His silence spoke volumes. His actions had already spoken louder than anything he could ever say now. The investigation quickly unraveled the sordid details of the affair, the whispered conversations, the late-night meetings, the lies. The truth that had been carefully hidden beneath the surface of this seemingly normal family life came rushing out in the wake of the violence. But the damage was done. No amount of truth could undo what had been torn apart in that single, tragic moment. The police dug deeper, piecing together the timeline, but no explanation could ease the pain, the suffering, or the guilt that now consumed every person in that house. Then there was Dave. He had come home from work that evening, expecting nothing more than a quiet night with his family. But instead he walked into a nightmare. The man who had been oblivious to the affair, who had trusted his wife, was now standing at the precipice of an unthinkable tragedy. His mind raced as he tried to comprehend what had happened. How could his son do this? How could his wife betray him like this? His heart broke for the loss of Michael, for the devastation that had been caused by a secret he never even knew existed. But there was something else, something even more gut-wrenching. Dave was torn between his love for his son, who was now sitting in front of him, his face full of regret, and his wife, whose betrayal had torn their family apart. How could he love both of them when everything he thought he knew had been shattered? The community that had once seen this family as the picture of suburban normalcy was now grappling with a tragedy that no one could have predicted. The news spread quickly, whispers behind closed doors, eyes filled with pity, and questions that no one could answer. How could this happen in a place like this? How could someone so close to them, someone they had trusted, be capable of such violence? The same people who had once shared birthday parties, barbecues, and casual conversations were now left wondering how they had missed the signs. The tragedy didn't just affect the family. It rippled through the entire community, leaving a trail of devastation behind it. As the days passed, the reality of what had happened sank in. Michael was gone. The affair was out in the open. The family was broken beyond repair. The house that once held laughter, warmth, and love now stood as a cold reminder of the choices that had led to this. Janet, who had once been so sure of her actions, now had to face the consequences of her betrayal. Alex, who had acted out of anger, now had to live with the guilt of taking a life. And Dave had to pick up the pieces of a shattered family and try to find a way forward, even though everything he had known had been torn apart in the blink of an eye. In the end, there was no clear resolution, no happy ending, just the aftermath of a tragedy that no one could have seen coming. A family torn apart by betrayal, violence, and the devastation of choices that could never be undone. What do you think? What would you do if you were in Dave's shoes? Would you be able to forgive your son, or would the weight of his actions be too much to bear? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. This story, tragic as it is, leaves us with a lot to think about. And we're not done yet. Stay tuned for the next part of this heartbreaking saga. As the dust settled and the aftermath of the violence unfolded, the investigation began in earnest. The house that had once been filled with laughter and love was now the center of a crime scene. The family, torn apart by betrayal and violence, was now under the unrelenting gaze of the law. The police moved in quickly, questioning everyone involved, trying to piece together the chain of events that had led to such a tragic outcome. The questions came fast and furious, and Janet, still reeling from the events, could hardly hold herself together. She was forced to confront her own actions, the affair, the lies, the manipulation, and the role she had played in setting the stage for the disaster that had unfolded. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying, but there was no hiding the truth. The affair with Michael, the deception, the betrayal, everything came pouring out in the cold, clinical environment of the police station. She had no choice but to face the consequences of what she had done, no matter how much she wanted to deny it. And then there was Alex, the young man whose life had been irrevocably altered by the decisions of the people closest to him. He had walked into that room filled with rage and betrayal, and in a moment of uncontrolled anger had taken a life. The weight of that would now follow him for the rest of his life. The investigation revealed everything, every detail of the confrontation, every moment that led to the fateful, tragic end. Alex was arrested. He was charged with murder, the full weight of the law now pressing down on him. The questions were relentless. Why had he done it? What had driven him to kill his best friend? Was there any way to justify such an act of violence? The answers were elusive. Alex had acted in a moment of rage, but the legal system wasn't concerned with emotions. It was concerned with justice. As the case made its way through the courts, the legal drama unfolded in front of a stunned audience. The courtroom became the battleground for justice, where the betrayal of a family, the murder of a son's best friend, and the collapse of a marriage all collided in one devastating case. The tension in the room was palpable. Lawyers on both sides presented their arguments, each trying to make sense of the impossible. Was Alex truly a victim of his circumstances, or was he a young man who had let his anger consume him? Was Janet, the mother who had started the whole chain of events with her affair, just as guilty as her son? Could she be held responsible for her part in the violence? The courtroom was divided, with each side presenting their own version of the truth. The prosecution argued that Janet's affair had caused the family's breakdown. that it had been the catalyst for the events that led to Michael's death. A mother's affair destroyed a family, the prosecutor declared, their voice steady, cutting through the tension in the courtroom. A family's foundation, once built on trust, was shattered by lies and deceit, and the consequences were fatal. On the defense side, the argument was made that Alex had acted in the heat of the moment, that his actions were driven by his emotional turmoil and the pain of betrayal. They painted Alex as a young man who had been pushed too far, whose world had been turned upside down by the betrayal of both his mother and his best friend. His defense attorney argued that the violence wasn't premeditated, it was a response to an unbearable situation that no one could have predicted. The tension in the courtroom was thick, and the atmosphere was charged with emotion. Each word, each argument, each piece of evidence weighed heavily on the judge and the jury. The case was not just about murder. It was about family, betrayal, and the fragility of trust. The family, once whole, was now a broken shell of what it had been, and no legal outcome could ever truly mend what had been torn apart in that house. And then came the final moments of the trial. The jury deliberated, the clock ticking down as the fate of Alex, Janet, and Michael hung in the balance. In the end, the decision would be made, not just by the law, but by the raw emotions of a family who had been torn apart by the very thing that was supposed to keep them together. What would happen to Alex? What would happen to Janet? Could the legal system truly provide justice in a case like this, where the lines between right and wrong had become so blurred? The questions lingered, unanswered, as the story of this broken family unfolded in the harsh light of the courtroom. And for the community, for the people who had once known them, the devastating reality of the tragedy was far from over. So, what do you think? How would you have handled the situation if you were in Alex's shoes? Would you have acted out of anger, or would you have found another way to cope with the betrayal? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. This story, with all its twists and turns, leaves us grappling with the complexities of human emotions, relationships, and the legal system. As the dust begins to settle on this heart-wrenching case, we are left with nothing but questions and consequences. Janet's affair, which began as a fleeting escape from the loneliness of her marriage, spiraled out of control, unraveling not just her family, but her very identity. What started as a simple connection, a moment of emotional comfort, ultimately led to irreversible damage. A life was lost, trust was shattered, and a community, once whole, was forever changed by the catastrophic fallout of this one devastating secret. This wasn't just a tragedy of a family torn apart by betrayal. It wasn't just a story of an affair that festered and caused unimaginable pain. No, this was something far deeper. A tragedy of broken promises, of shattered lives, and of a young man who lost everything he thought he knew. Alex, once a son with the world at his feet, found himself trapped in a spiral of rage and confusion, forced to make a choice that would haunt him forever. His anger, though understandable in its roots, led to a tragic decision that no one could have seen coming. He became the catalyst for an ending that left a gaping hole where a family once stood. As for Janet, the emotional isolation that had once driven her into the arms of someone else now became the very thing that destroyed the foundation of her home. She was no longer just a mother or a wife, but a woman whose actions had consequences too large to contain. She had to face the harsh reality of her choices, not just as a wife or mother, but as a woman who had broken something that could never truly be fixed. And Michael, once a trusted friend, someone who had been a part of this family's life for so long, found himself at the heart of the devastation, unable to undo the damage he had helped create. The affair, The betrayal, the violence, it all culminated in a tragedy that no one could have predicted. In the end, justice was served in the form of the law, but the emotional scars, the destruction of lives, and the ripple effects through the community remain. There is no true justice in a case like this. What happens when betrayal runs so deep? What happens when a family is so shattered that it cannot be put back together again? Can any legal outcome really provide the closure needed for the pain and loss that were caused? This case, though now closed in a courtroom, will linger in the hearts and minds of those who were touched by it. It will haunt Alex, Janet, and Michael for the rest of their lives, and it will leave the community grappling with the lessons that must be learned from such a devastating tragedy. Trust, once broken, can never truly be restored, and the choices we make, whether they are out of loneliness, anger, or deceit, can set into motion a chain of events that no one can ever predict or undo. So, what do you think? Was justice truly served in this case? Is there ever a way to fix something that has been broken beyond repair? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. This story is a stark reminder of the power of our choices and the devastating consequences they can have. If you found this case as heartbreaking and thought-provoking as I did, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true crime stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat, wondering how far the darkness can reach when secrets are kept too long. As we close the chapter on this tragic story, I want to thank you for joining me on this unsettling journey. If you're as captivated by these dark and twisted tales as I am, make sure to hit that notification bell so you never miss another case. More chilling true crime stories are on the way, and trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the truth is darker